Hello, welcome back to another quilting video. Today we're talking about quilting supplies for your first quilt. There are a few things that you need before you can start quilting. Quilting is one of those hobbies where you can absolutely end up with way too much stuff. But today we're just talking about the basics, those things that you need to have before you can start your first quilt. First up is fabric, obviously. You can't make a quilt without some kind of fabric. This is the fun part, but it can also be really overwhelming, especially when you're beginning. If you can, try and go into a shop. In my experience, the people who work in quilting shops or fabric shops will love to hear what you're working on and help you find the fabrics that you need and that you're gonna love. You can choose just plain solid fabrics like these. You can choose fabrics based on theme like these from my camping quilt. Or you can go by fabric collection here. Almost all of these are made by the same designer and they're made to go together, and I've just added in a few plain ones. Alright, I hope it's obvious, but I'm going to say it just to make sure. I began making this video earlier in the year before all the shutdowns and the isolation and everything, and I know that going into a fabric shop is not an option right now. I'm working on another video at the moment that goes more in depth into buying fabric online. That should be my next video. If you're watching this in the future, I'll add a link into the description below this video. But if you're in a position to buy a fabric right now and you need a starting point, I would suggest either sticking to a single collection. That's easy to do online, they're coordinated and designed to work together. Most online retailers offer collections all ready to purchase as a bundle, or you can just add your specific favorites to your cart and buy them that way. Or the other option I'd recommend is to go to a smaller retailer like Cottonier. A lot of smaller fabric shops make their own bundles. They combine different fabrics together in a cohesive grouping that doesn't strictly follow a single fabric collection. So here someone else has done the work of making sure the different fabrics work well together, and this option is a little more custom, a little less matchy-matchy, and it's just as easy as buying from one collection online. Quilting fabric should be 100% cotton. It's the easiest to work with and you know how it's going to wear. Sometimes people do use old clothes, or I've seen people make quilts from curtains. You can do this, but they're a little harder to work with, so I would recommend sticking with 100% quilting cotton, especially in the beginning. You also need a way to cut your fabric. There's two options here. You can go with fabric scissors. If you go this route, make sure you keep them far away from any other scissors and never use them for cutting anything but fabric, because they will dull really fast, and that is really annoying because they can get expensive. Your other option is a rotary cutter like this, and it's like a pizza cutter. It's got the blade that pops out here, and you can cut the fabric that way, and you just pop the blade back in. This is much easier than fabric scissors in my opinion. Each rotary cutter is going to be slightly different, but there's a way to pop it out and a way to pop it in. Make sure you get in the habit of always closing it whenever you put it down, because just anywhere, talk to any quilter and they're going to have a horror story because these things are so sharp. My preference is to use the rotary cutter over the scissors for most things. These are much easier to handle, it's much easier to cut precisely, and much easier to be accurate when you're measuring. If you are using a rotary cutter, then you need a cutting mat. These can also get expensive. This one here is 18 inches by 24 inches. This would be my preference. You can get away with a smaller one. I used this one here I've got is well used, as you can see, and it is 18 by 12. Small is fine, but it means you're moving the fabric more. It's easier to mess up your measurements when you're using a smaller mat when you're cutting big pieces of fabric. So it's kind of a toss-up of cost savings with the smaller one versus time savings with the larger one, I think. I used this smaller one for a long time and it worked. My fabric turned into quilts using that one, but I'm much happier with this larger one. You can see here with the bigger one, if you have a full length piece of fabric, you can fold it in half and cut it straight in one go on this larger one. Whereas with the smaller one, you've got to move the fabric constantly to make a straight cut. So there's time savings with the bigger one, only having to place it and cut it once. And there's also the increased accuracy with not having to move the fabric and realign the ruler. Next up, I'm sure you didn't see this coming, it's rulers. If you're using a rotary cutter, you really need a ruler to make sure your cuts are straight and the size that you need. These come in so many different sizes, from different brands, different configurations, so there are some things to look out for. I'm going to use this one as an example because I think it's the clearest for you guys to see. This one is a 6-inch square. There's marks for each 1/4 inch Along the edges, there are smaller dimensions. There's other different lines as well. There's 45-degree angle lines, 60-degree angle lines. These are good for when you're making triangles. There's the center point that's marked. Other rulers will have different lines, but rulers can get expensive once you start buying a lot. So choose what you need for your first quilt. If you're using a pattern, often it will have a suggestion. And then over time, as you need more, if you need more, you can add them to your collection. Next up, once you've got your fabrics and that's all cut, you need a way to sew. So that can either be a needle and thread or a sewing machine. The vast majority of my quilts are made by machine. I have got my one hexagon quilt that I've been working on for a while now. That is all being sewn by hand. It's a different process. Hand sewing is slower, more methodical, also a lot cheaper. If you're sewing a quilt by machine, it's a lot faster. In my opinion, it's easier, but buying that sewing machine is going to be a lot more expensive than picking up some needles. That said, there are cheap sewing machines out there that are perfectly functional and usable with any of these supplies. You don't need to go out and buy the absolute best top of the line. Get what you need. You can choose one that fits your budget and your needs, and then later if you find you need a better one, you can always upgrade and sell the old one. My machine is nothing special or great. I've been sewing on this very entry-level sewing machine for a long time and it's served me really well. There are some features that I would like in a newer, more expensive, better machine, but for now I'm more than happy with this and it hasn't been worth the cost to upgrade just yet. Regardless of if you're hand sewing or machine sewing, when it comes to the thread, go for cotton, not polyester. And don't cheap out and get the absolute lowest priced thread. You don't need to get the absolute most expensive thread, but somewhere in the middle is good to start with. No matter how careful you are, you're always going to also need a seam ripper. These things are great, they're so cheap, maybe $1 or $2 at Spotlight, and it is going to be your best friend because no matter how careful you are, something's going to happen and you're going to have to rip out a couple of stitches here or there at least. Pins of some sort are also really good. They're going to help keep your fabric pieces together and aligned when you're sewing them, which is going to make your finished quilt top much higher quality. Pinning the fabrics can take some time and it can be annoying when you want to move on to the next step, but taking that time before you start sewing to make sure everything's aligned is going to make your finished quilt top so much better, and it's completely worth it. You also need a way to keep your quilt layers together as you're doing the quilting. So that could be something like these basting pins. These are normal safety pins with a slight curve to them. That just makes it much easier to get through all the layers of fabric you're going to be combining. Your other option is some kind of spray. I don't love using this stuff just for the environmental reasons, but it is a lot easier. Some people make their own basting spray, which is really cool and something that I plan to do for my next quilt, but you will need one of those two things. You can also thread baste, which is where you just do really big loose hand stitches and then you come back and take it out later. So there are options there: safety pins, needle and thread, or some kind of basting spray, but you're going to need one of them. And finally, you're going to need some kind of iron. This doesn't need to be anything special. Whatever you've got, a cheap one from Target or Kmart or wherever it is going to be just fine. You will also need some sort of batting or wadding. This is what goes in the middle of your quilt. It gives your quilt its warmth and texture. It can get expensive. I got this big roll recently because it was on super sale. Crazy good deal at Spotlight, and it is 228 centimeters by 8.2 meters. So that's going to get me a good couple of quilts done with this bolt. You can absolutely buy smaller pieces of this and just get what you need for the quilt you're working on at the moment. There are so many options with this. You can get cotton, you can get polyester, you can get bamboo, you can get a blend of all three or two of the three. There are pros and cons to each of them. This one's a bamboo cotton blend, which is my favorite. It's much thinner than polyester. These will be quite thick and they're less warm, and I much prefer using natural fibers when I'm sewing. But get the batting that works for your quilt. Go into the shop and look at the packaging. It will tell you what it's made for, how warm it is. Sometimes they'll be labeled as summer or winter, and it will also say how dense or thin your quilting can be. So have a look what they say and choose the best for your quilt project. So there you go. If you're looking to start quilting, these supplies alone will get you a really long way. Don't go crazy with specialized tools and all the bits and bobs that are available. Stick to these basics and there's a lot that you can do with them. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like it and subscribe to my channel. I have a few quilts I'm working on at the moment and I'm excited to share all the details about them. And I also have some more videos more like this one that I'm working on. So stick around. I love helping people make quilts and I've got some good stuff coming up. Let me know in the comments if there's any particular aspect of quilting you want to see videos on. I'm curious and I want to make videos that are helpful to you guys. And also I just like hearing from you in the comments. It's really nice. Thanks for watching today and I'll see you next time.